So, let me start by saying how not only grateful but also happy we are. Last time I was here was 1991, studying history of architecture on the streets. Chile is a country that barely has any architecture. We do have nature, but not really history. So that lessons are still not only valid, but present. This couple of days, we keep on going to the old city, and there are many lessons to be learned. How can architecture last? Not only physically, which is threatened by natural disasters like these ones, but also culturally. How can we make things that are still useful, relevant, valid for contemporary culture? And I guess there's many lessons that can be learned. And some of those lessons, I think, are useful when we're working on first stones. Any disaster, in a way, to make the losses not have been in vain, material losses, but also lives. The questions that we've learned should be asked to ourselves whenever there's a disaster is, what are the things that can be changed that under normal circumstances would have been impossible to? So at least the devastation can allow you to ask yourself, is there anything that in normal conditions I would have never changed? And that is something that we learned that we didn't know before our 2010 earthquake, but actually is the kind of thing that you become conscious while doing. So the most part of the presentation will be how we addressed, and somehow we're improvising what to do urgently. I mean, no time, almost no resources to react. And yet, some of those things have been implemented in other projects. The last video I will show today is the reconstruction after the fires in 2024, another February. So something is with February, you know? It's February 2024, February 2010, February 2023. In our case, it's part earthquake. There's a following video that starts with the earthquake, of course. But for us, it was mainly the tsunami that came with the earthquake. So without further ado, let's take a look at as an introduction.
Contivisión Noticias.
Seguimos conociendo noticias. Último día de descanso o último fin de semana para relajarse porque ya comienza marzo. También es mi último informativo Me voy al descanso propio de unas, espero, merecidas vacaciones, pero de todas maneras seguirá trabajando el equipo de prensa de Televisión Contivisión para informarles. Buen fin de semana, aprovechenlo, disfrútenlo y también buen inicio de año escolar para todos los estudiantes.
Next one.
Contivisión Noticias.
Next one. So it was an 8.8 Richter scale earthquake, and between the earthquake and the tsunami, we had 18 minutes until people could go up to the hills. For some reason, even though Chile has had the biggest earthquake in history, 9.6 in 1960, it's popular knowledge what to do in an earthquake, not necessarily what to do in a tsunami. And so there's a huge need to update whatever we need to do regarding that type of force. Earthquakes can be solved at the building scale. A tsunami has to be solved at the city scale. And that's a complete different approach. We don't know what to do. The building code in Chile is rather, I would say, smart in the sense that it allows for saving lives, but it's still affordable for the income of the country. 300,000 units were damaged. 500 people died. Maybe 100 because of the earthquake. 400 was tsunami. And so the deaths were mainly in old buildings built before codes improvement. First one started in 1939, then in 1960, 1985, 2010, and each time we've been adjusting the code so that it can, on the one hand, save lives, and at the same time be followed. Maybe just from now, because we were talking technically with the team of Tuba about the approach, the philosophical approach for the earthquake code. So one thing is the amount of energy that enters a structure is so big that one strategy could be make a structure that is stronger than the earthquake. The code in Chile is prepared for 9 in Richter scale, beyond 9. That happens, I guess, very rarely, but still there's nothing to do. If you follow the Japanese approach, they tend to do structures that are stronger than the energy that enters from the earthquake. And that's extremely expensive. That's one strategy. The other strategy is to isolate the building from the ground. So seismic isolators are also rather expensive. What the Chilean code has been consistently doing to improve is to take from the Japanese the standards, but then design structures that in order to free and liberate the energy, they break but don't collapse. And for that to happen, not every structure is that well prepared. Let's say a wall structure is better at breaking without collapsing. A frame structure is more vulnerable in that sense. But we're allowing the fracture of the structure to liberate the energy. So maybe the next day, media comes and all the buildings look cracked. And actually, we may have to demolish them, but lives were saved. I think the discussion here has been that, well, let's go up with the code so that the structure doesn't break. Well, I would really recommend not to do that, in the sense that, in principle, it's desirable to have a structure that can be used after an earthquake. But the cost of it will be so much that people then will cheat and not follow the code. That's why in Chile, by being able to make a structure that can break, it's something that in the sections and in the amount of rivers, the proportion of concrete and the whole design, it's doable and payable by people. Of course, you can have institutions to control that, but you need that to become popular knowledge, not necessarily a technical knowledge. And of course, the third approach that we were discussing before is seismic isolation. And there are some devices, at least that I know, that in Chile have been developed for low-cost seismic isolation with Teflon or with geometric shapes from a foundation instead of going for the rubber-steel combination of the isolators, which is the more conventional approach. Well, that being said, with Earth 8, the question was, okay, what do we do next? Can we show a couple of images? And we were called to work in a city called Constitución, 400 kilometers south from Santiago. It's in the middle of the forest region. Actually, what you see on your right is the cellulose plant, and the waves entered from the Pacific with 12 meter high. But then when they kept on going through the river inside, those were already 6 meter high. So next one. And well, this was the thing that for some reason it was not integrated in our background. Next one. the force of the, because it's not big waves, actually it's a mass of water, no? It's moving at 800 kilometers an hour, but then when it approaches the continent, it compensates speed with either height or force. So, next one. Next one. Next one. These are adobe buildings that fell. The new ones resisted quite well. Next one. Next one. The other thing that happened, I don't recall having this in 1985, and I asked my father in 1960, was the sacking and lootings of stores. To the point that, I mean, people, some of them, it's reasonable that people are afraid that no aid is arriving, so no food, no water. But people were stealing TVs and washing machines from stores. So there was, I mean, this is connected maybe to 2019, the social unrest that was already cultivated. This is the first sign of this social ticking time bomb that had been accumulating in our cities. Next one. To the point that police and the military had to go on the street to keep some social peace because of the level of, I don't know how to call it, there's masses of people just, going beyond the law. Next one. In any case, we were called to work in the city of Constitución, and we were given 100 days to come up with every possible plan for the reconstruction of the city. When I say we, it's of course our office, Elemental, but we were one out of 5 different consultants that had to team together to come up with a strategy for the city. One strategic communication company for dealing with people, how to interact with the community, that was Tironi. Then Arup for some engineering, local university, and then some consultant about tourism because of the economic recovery was connected to tourism. So that was let's say, the kind of group of consultants. I think what has never been said, and actually I was just reflecting here while sitting and then heard you thinking about how to help somebody that hasn't been credited enough. We were even called because somebody thought that the state was not going to be able to arrive fast enough. In order to hire somebody like us, which is a private company, you need to have a public bidding process. But what the basis for that bidding process, nobody knew. What do we do? So to even prepare the base for a internet or whatever competition to hire consultants would have taken quite a long amount of time. So that person, which is a former partner that left Elemental many years ago, he was at the time the Vice Minister of Housing in Chile. He's a transport engineer, he's a master in Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, but he's a mind that is able to understand how to administrate and organize. And he thought that in this 400-kilometer strip that was affected by the earthquake and tsunami, he would identify who was the local private, either company, institution, or whatever, main producer, mining industry, forest industry, fishing industry, whatever it was, and ask them to, as soon as possible, to donate not bricks, but brains. So, for a private company, in the case of us, was this first company, Arauco. They hired this group of consultants, the 5 I mentioned, rather quickly. They didn't, I mean, they can do as a private company, just report to the board, but they can move fast with the hiring. It was not clear what to do, but that saved a lot of time. And it was this way to approach the problem that by the presidency we were given 100 days. Okay, you start in March, by June you have to have whatever the outcome is ready and be presented at the presidential palace. So we distributed our time of those 100 days in a time scale. What has to be done on day 1, 3, 10, 100 to present to the authorities, but we knew it had to keep on going, so the plan already had to be some kind of open to, but the basis had to be set in place at the very beginning. It was clear because of the nervousness and people not being guaranteed having basic needs satisfied, water distribution is one of the things that need to solve first. Next one. And one of the things is that when you have adults going to go for water distribution, I mean, they could be doing things that are more, let's say, difficult. But for a child, for example, to carry water is very hard. You can't carry more than 5 liters, let's say, if you're a child. And then in Africa, whereas there's examples that instead of lifting or carrying water, you make it roll. And so we thought, and actually, I brought some of those hippo rollers to Chile. I actually was coming back from South Africa the day before the earthquake. But then we thought, but this is not available in Chile. What can we do with the available resources? And so next one. It should be a video. So this is my older son at the time. Now he's a 26-year-old psychologist. But we wanted, and he didn't know why we were casting him, and we wanted to prove how to make a child be part of, I mean, every single person in the society is a needed resource. You just have to put them to perform the appropriate task. So there was a lot of debris after the tsunami, and making roads or wall may allow children also to be part of the effort, and then adults can do things that were more difficult, go to the municipality or to ask for a subsidy or something like that. So in order to, again, to address scale, time scale, distributed water, next one. I think that you can, yeah, when you just click on the slide, it can naturally grow instead of double clicking. So the next thing, and has been discussed here, is emergency shelter. And that's something you knew, you had to buy time. And in the sense that given reconstruction is going to take maybe more than one winter, and we do have cold winters as well in Chile, maybe not as cold as here, but pretty cold. What was there in disaster relief, in emergency shelters that could be improved? I happened to be in the north of Chile in 2007 in an earthquake that was maybe 7.5 or something, and when I arrived, they had already in place, this is our response to disaster. It's a wood shack room, 3x6, no insulation, just a door to enter, and the military did these terraces, and they placed these units, as you see here. This is 3, 5, 3, 1. So back to back, the units were back to back, and each of those units sharing this common space from where they entered the shack. When you went to the city, most of the people were not using those shelters, mainly because they were afraid that if they left their homes and stuff alone at home, they would be stolen and robbed. And they couldn't bring the stuff here because the space is too small. So we said, and there was unfortunately at that time no room to maneuver, we said, how different would have been if, next one, the same amount of units with the same density in space, instead of being back to back, you just, put, let's say, a transference of the geometry so that each of the units is facing the back of the next one. So instead of dividing it in 5, 1, it was 3, 3, 3, so always the rhythm of 3, because with that, each family would have an individual courtyard. Let's call it courtyard, or at least a space where they can put stuff that doubled the initial size from 18 to 36 meters, and there was at least a higher chance to have them coming with their staff. They may cover the space in between, depending on how much time it took. And this was not different from the strategy that we used for housing. Actually, the module of 3 was exactly the module we were using in incremental housing. So we knew that whenever you put the back of the next unit, then you can grow onto your next neighbor's structure. And this, in a way, I would say, that's the role of design. As you see, there's not the design of the unit. The unit was what it was. It was $500. It was available. It was fabricated by different NGOs. But what an architect can contribute is the same 6 meters, instead of being distributed between 5 and 1 with a shared entrance, distributed in 3 by 3 and 3 with an individual entrance. And this, in the end, is design. I mean, it tends to cost nothing, but it makes a huge difference. Next one. Because that is the kind of thing that in the 2010 earthquake, 3 years later, there was no communication. You can see the type of iPhone that we were using. But text messages were going through. So design had to go, we had to design with text messages. No drawings possible. And an instruction where you say, well, in Spanish is place these shelters 3 meters distance from each other, with the back facing the door of the next one. So it's an instruction. If you're able to explain your design with words, then you may have a point. So that went through, and with that strategy, the other thing that we knew from our social housing projects is to achieve a scale that is intermediate between the individual unit and then the let's say everything, the streets. And if you are able to achieve those courtyards, so we were saying organize these shelters around the courtyard, not more than 20 families. This is what we knew from social housing. That intermediate level of association, you know, it's very relevant in socially fragile environments. Imagine, and that was the case, that for the shelters, you can install collective bathrooms. If you have to put one per unit, it's almost impossible. And if you put it at the whole city level, I mean, it would be, dirty and nobody would like to go. But at that scale, a group of families that is not more than 20 can agree and say, let's have, who will be cleaning the bathrooms? Or cooking, for example. If you are a collective cooking at some scale, it's easier that each of the families spending time in cooking. So that intermediate level of association that has proved to be, naturally efficient in slums was something we were learning from and used in social housing, and then we thought was going to be relevant. And then these were the schemes that when we were able to go to the south, of course no roads, so we had to fly. These two strategies. Actually, this is exactly the plan of the Quinta Monroy project, where you have a central bone, a central spines, and then you're flipping these courtyards to 2 sides, and you gain at least 20% more of land efficiency by doing so. Well, in any case, that was regarding how to place the existing shelter as it is. The next one. But then the next thought we had was, we need to buy time. And in those shelters that had no insulation, no nothing, then the nervousness will grow. So can we have a design for a shelter that is better? Of course, when the quality of the initial unit is so bad, it's very easy to do it better. But it's also more expensive. How can we explain to a government that has already scarce resources to spend more time in shelters? And we thought that the only way was that normally temporary shelters, those emergency shelters, you use them and then until they dissolve, and then of course you throw it to the garbage, so in a way it's lost money. We said, if we have better quality shelters that then instead of being thrown away is part of the permanent solution that we will give to housing, this will be a kind of early investment. So let's say a first stone. From that point of view, maybe next one. And even next one. Yeah, so let's say the conventional approach of the government will be that Mediagua, which is the shelter, is a cost of $1,000, let's say 18 square meters, and it can be put in place in 1 day. That's the advantage of that thing. But then the government will come with the permanent solution that is actually, unfortunately, not that different, just with more windows and more colors, and maybe that's what we are architects called for, you know, to, as Richard Rogers said, is to put lipstick on the gorilla. So, in any case, the cost of those units will be around $30,000, and in the end, this is thrown away, and then because of the units are tiny, then the transformation of them is a very bad urban environment at the very end at the cost of $31,000. So we said, what if we have a better shelter that is, of course, more expensive, double of the initial size, so a family maybe can resist much better a winter because it was insulated. It was still fast to install, 2 days instead of 1, triple the cost. But then when we move into how the permanent solution, if we follow the incremental approach, we know it costs a fraction of the final solution because you're mainly given just the structure. And if you then can take the panels of the shelter and put it inside the permanent solution, in the end your cost is 23,000 instead of 31, but you have a better quality throughout the process. So there's a video of this shelter we designed. With zip panels, so it was expanded polyester inside the wood panel. Being able to install by 3 people. This is something we knew actually from the social housing because the size of the void that we were using in social housing was 3 meters. That is actually the size of the panels of those mediaguas, which is what people used to get from NGOs in the slums. So whenever we build, maybe next one, and keep on the next one, yeah. So we knew that when we gave the part of the house that was done with public funding, then families were waiting outside, waiting for the ceremony to end when the authorities were gone, and all the panels were on top of trucks, and they would enter and complete rooms the next weekend. So the size of that void was, I mean, that was an experience we already witnessed in the projects, and so we were using the same strategy for the shelter plus permanent solution for have a better temporary solution for the families. And then on day 100, we knew, so we were in parallel working towards that goal. Next one. Next one. The first thing, I think maybe this was an intuition, but proved to be right. As I said before, to gain time, the government asked private companies to hire professional teams. Fine, you gain time, but there's always, and then in a country particularly like Chile, the suspicion that, well, but maybe this team will make a solution that is just appropriate and beneficial for the private company. So how can we guarantee that the suspicion of the operation is taken away? So the first thing we did was to design a client. Even though the check was paid by a private company, we were reporting to a consortium that had 3 parts. The private companies, or let's say the local businesses that were supporting the professional aid, all the public institutions at every level, national, central level, or regional level, or the municipality, because public institutions are created to, let's say, look after the public good or the common good. So that's their motto. And then the third one was people. So that we wanted to make sure, not only because, again, our experience in social housing, the participatory processes are important, because people tend to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I mean, other cities were not trusting the third part because, well, if we include people, it will slow down the process and will make it more expensive. But we knew, maybe intuitively, that it was not going to be the case. It proved to be the right thing to do, not only for the efficiency of the channeling of the resources, but mainly for another reason that we didn't know at the time. Political times are shorter than city times. Transformation in cities tend to happen in periods of time that are bigger or longer than political periods. So had not the people been there, every new authority would have come and would have started a discussion, okay, what do we do? But given people were sitting on the table, we had in the meantime 3 presidents, several mayors and governors and everything. When you were going to a meeting like this with the people, the only faces that you would recognize was the organized community. And they were saying to authorities, when they were starting to say, so, okay, what do we do? They said, no, there's no such a question. We already have a plan. So your job is to keep on implementing the same plan. And the role of people then guarantees a certain level of efficiency in terms of continuity. Otherwise, you're starting all the time from scratch. Next one. And then some details we can discuss later on or tomorrow regarding the role and the benefits of each of those stakeholders in this triad. Next one. And of course, given people was one of the, let's say, clients we were reporting to, the notion of how to make people participate is not just, invite people and then cross your fingers and see what happens. There's very specific methods of how to make people participate, but not only that, what to expect from participation. And here are some clues that we can discuss later on. So just that you remind that participatory processes do have specific goals, or let's say inputs from the people that you're using afterwards, and it's not just this kind of hippie thing, let's dream together about the future city. Next one. Is there some water, please? Okay, thank you. And so by day 20-something, the other thing we understood pretty soon, that the same way it was going to take a lot of time to hire from the public part professionals, if you have a point or an idea of a project, how much would it take to get the public funding for that? And the ratio between how much money cost the whole operation was like 70% was public money, 30% was private money. So in order to have the public part, which is the most important or the most relevant one of the funding, again, to go through a process of when you assign budgets to a given project, you have to go through a very, let's put it away, rigorous process. It may take a couple of years. Thank you so much. So what we did was we dived into the public investment system to see how many projects for the city were already in the system with some level of approval, so that we can then pick them up and eventually slightly change the original goal, but start from something that had already the budget approved. And these were the projects that we identified that were in the system. Some of them were not useful, but many of them, and you will see, the moment you started to coordinate those, then you could eventually gain a lot of time in the funding, especially at the infrastructural scale. Next one. So with that, we had this, let's say, array of projects in these 5 categories. And then, we did, as early as possible, some pictures, because we wanted the people to vote for which projects to do first, not to which projects to which projects to do first. Because we knew we were not going to be able to do everything at the same time, but then this is one of the clues for participatory processes. Where to start from is up to the families. They may know better than us what is an urgency, what is a preference, and sometimes it's not necessarily the basic functions. Sometimes it's symbolic value. things that are able to mobilize emotionally the population. So we asked them to vote. Next one, some images. By day 10, I think, in the main square of the city, we built this open house so that, again, part of creating trust among the community, this was the place where all the discussions, the debates at different levels, but also all the designs were displayed so that anybody walking by could see what was going to be discussed in the coming weeks. So as to be as open, we call it actually the open house. Next one. I think there's a video, yes. You just click on the...
¿Cómo quiere la ciudad? Ahora vota por constitución y vaya a la casa del PRES y exprese su opción. Participa a toda la comunidad, así que toda la comunidad.
Específicamente yo como pescador tengo 25 pescadores. ¿Dónde lo voy a llevarlo yo? ¿Al bosque?
Entonces, ¿por qué nosotros no podemos tener una defensa de hormigón? Por supuesto, bien hecho.
Soy historia de Constitución y vivieron mis actores. Y este señor me viene a decir que yo no puedo seguir viviendo ahí. No te digo. Ha vivido toda mi familia, toda una vida ahí. Crié a mis hijos y mis hijos criarán a sus hijos. Y mis hijos y mis nietos y todo. Pero ¿por qué me viene a imponer usted? Él me está imponiendo. Mi zona de riesgo yo no puedo autorizar a construir. No, nieve. Él mismo lo está diciendo. Nieve.
Next one. And even next one. Keep on going. Yeah. So as you can see, the participatory process is not a nice thing. I mean, it's again, I mean, they're valid worries, and people, I mean, that fisherman over there, you may have not seen the subtitles, they're rather small, but from the body language you can tell he's complaining about, and of course then you meet the guy and he says, look, lift the engine of my boat. I mean, if you want me to be two blocks away from the river, I mean, how can I carry that thing? And I believe it close to the river, it will be stolen the next day. So what do I do? Do you want me to bring it to the forest? That was he was mainly saying. So these are the kind of constraints, or this is the brief for the project. How do you get from the people what is the right question? Not what is the answer. We are not asking them what do you want in terms of the solution. We wanted to understand what was the question they wanted us to solve. Of course, the new thing, and one of the guys there, and I mean, maybe Sicilian I can tell, some of them, the fishermen, for example, they have the basic need there. The other one was the representative of the Chamber of Commerce, for example. So he was saying, why not have a concrete wall? So some of them were even already anticipating that there was to be an issue with the shore of the river, trying to put into the agenda their own brief. So the new thing was the discussion of how to prepare the city for the future tsunamis. And the alternative one was the ground zero danger zone, impossible to build here. Next one. And so the first couple of blocks of the city look like that. The cost of that approach would have been $13 million at the time, just to expropriate land. So basically the cost of this alternative was land expropriation, to prevent people to be installed back in a danger area. But being Latin American country, if you leave that land empty, we know that was going to become a slum pretty soon. So it was unrealistic to think that it will remain as a safe area. Next one. The second alternative that was being actually promoted by the government, because it meant just a one big contract with a big building company, so the lobby of the building chamber was in favor of heavy infrastructure to build a wall to protect the city. Next one. So if that was the area, next one. A wall that is at least from 7 to 10 meters high. The cost of that infrastructure, $42 million, and in the middle of the discussions that was still not clear, the Japan March 2011 happened, and then we had because everything was filmed, we have the proof that to try to resist the energy of a tsunami is useless. It's just too big. Actually, the first part of mass of water that hits a big wall bounces back, but then the rest of the mass of the water goes on top of the first one almost without friction. So it's accelerated into the backland of the wall, so heavy infrastructure was not an alternative. Next one. But because of the process of participation, in gatherings like this, some of the things that appeared was like, well, an old lady saying, I've been here all my life, but I don't recall when was the last tsunami. But we do have the problem of flooding due to rain every single winter. So whatever you do, thank you for the tsunami thing, but solve the problem of the flooding of the basin due to the bad canal system. Next one. So this was a map of the per year, every 2 years, every 5 years, and you see actually that the lady was right in the level of flooding that made the city collapse every single winter. So that was part of, I mean, we were trying to, again, the question of participatory process is to identify the question. Had we not done that, we would have answered, well, the wrong question. So by understanding that the question was the flooding, not only the tsunami, that was integrated in whatever we had to do. Second thing that appeared, public space in this city is very bad. They were complaining about public spaces, and we measured it. It was 2.2 square meters per inhabitant. In a recommendation of international organizations, is around 7 to 8 square meters per inhabitant. A rich neighborhood in Santiago has 18. London has 44 square meters per inhabitant of public green space. So they said, whatever you do, try to improve the quality of life of the city. Again, what can we do under the circumstances that in normal ones would have never been able to change? This is one of those questions. Next one. Next one. And finally, what they said, I mean, it was, again, this kind of, it was the wrong question. It was well-intentioned, but it was the wrong question. Central government was worried about rebuilding the old buildings that fell. So let's say the heritage. And that was Adobe, I mean, and heritage. It's not that it's a great thing. It was just kind of old, maybe 100 years compared to what you have here. It's close to zero, but in any case, it would have been very slow and very expensive. But the people of Constitución said, yeah, if you're worried about heritage because it's connected to our identity, well, be aware that our identity is not the architecture, is nature, is the geography. What gave origin to the city is the river. But over time, the river shore is owned by 16 people. So whatever you do, make sure that we can gain back democratic access to the river shore, because that's our identity. So that allowed us to channel much more efficiently the public resources, even though it was counterintuitive. Next one. Next one. So that's how our conclusion of the processes was a third alternative, which was, let's say, given you can't resist the energy of a tsunami, don't even pretend, dissipate the energy. And for that purpose, we thought we had to use nature. Against geographical threats, provide geographical answers. I said before that the waves from the west-north entered the cellulose plant with 12 meters, but then kept on going through the river with 6 meters. The reason is that the island in front of the city, with those trees, dissipated the energy by 50%. And then what we were thinking was create another forest in between the city and the ocean so that we can dissipate another 50%. And when you're around 3-meter high waves, we more or less know it's doable. I mean, a pier or collapsible ground floors or that kind of things. With 6 meters is very hard, but with 3 it's doable. So that was our approach, that then by doing a park, you laminate the water during winter. You use the park to create drainage so that the flooding goes into the park. You improve the square meters of public space from 2 to 7, And then it provides democratic access to the people that was part of their brief. Next one. So if that was the situation, next one. Well, you need a certain, what you need to introduce is chaos in the mass of water. So that chaos is introduced by the non-alignment of the trees of a certain diameter, and then also by the bumps on the ground level. So you introduce horizontal and vertical chaos, and that's the way energy is dissipated. The cost of this, 48 millions. And that, of course, is when you begin to have to now negotiate with the government. Next one. And that's why it was so important what we did on day 20 on that identifying projects that were already approved in the financing system, because 3 of them that were in different departments, and this is important, none of them knew another ministry was doing a project for the same place. So in the Ministry of Public Works, there's the port operation, the hydraulic operation, and then the Ministry of Housing. Each of them had a project, not knowing that the other one also had a project. That's why the scarcest resource in cities is not money, it's coordination. By far, somebody has to have the big picture, but that tends to not exist, at least in our institutional structure. So if you took all of them with approved budgets, it was $52 million. And by integrating in them in a single project, we were actually saving $4 million. But that was the presentation we had to do to the Ministry of Finance to prove that what in principle looked as a more expensive project, it was actually saving money, not to mention how much it was also saving time. Next one. How much time do I still have? It's okay. So this was the constitution before the earthquake and tsunami. Next one. So as you see, all the first blocks were devastated. Next one. And the construction of the park with the laminating and drainage ponds, and then this small hills. Many of the trees in the island, you see, died because of the salty water. But now they're kind of recovering, and then some of them are being replanted. Well, we're in the middle of the forest region. I mean, if there's knowledge there, it's about making trees grow, and that was part of the assets that we were trying to use in the. So next one, as a park, different views from the mitigation park. Next one. Next one. And not only the park, the recovering, there's a tradition in Chile, maybe we're very bad in sports in general, but rowing is one of the things that people do, and they're very proud, some of the fishermen that are part of these rowing teams in Chile. So that was, again, not only a pragmatic, or let's say life-saving operation, it was also connected to the pride of the city. Next one. And the other thing, well, of course, housing, and this is the first time we implemented this house with this shape, because being in the middle of the forest region, wood was the most available material. Then, for some reason, in Chile, we very hardly or very rarely build in wood, and in any case, if you build, it's associated to, that's what you do for the poor. So it also, you have to overcome this kind of weight, symbolic weight that some of the operations tend to have. Next one. Talking about the kind of things that under normal circumstances you never change, that's the footprint of the city. Our cities, particularly in the peripheries, tend to be binary. You either have public space, streets, squares, or the private lot, that in poor neighborhoods and municipalities, whatever is for everybody is in reality for nobody. So nobody pays for maintenance, and they tend to be kind of dangerous places. So in addition, by having these very small plots of 14 meter depth, the density of streets, it's huge. So you're spending a lot of money in streets that are not necessarily needed. So it's also a question of how to allocate public resources. Next one. So that's why in our first project, we already knew that in between public and private, introduce that intermediate level of association, the one that I mentioned regarding how to organize the shelters. So that was our, and never more than, hopefully never 30 families. This is the measure that we know that a social agreement can be maintained over time. Whatever is agreed by that group of families, in up to 30, it keeps on being alive. Beyond that, you don't know who is who. It's very hard. So either the bully takes over, the narcos, or you lose control of the situation. And so in the introduction of that level of association. Next one. That, as you see, that would be the typical footprint of our cities. You have passages every 28 meters, and then the houses. And for the same density, we introduced in Constitution that courtyard structure up there. Next one. And what matters here is, as you see, again, where is design here? Is not really in the house itself. Take a look at this thing here, and take a look at that one here. So let's say the house is not exactly the same, but more or less, their design is not there. The real difference is that, imagine this person here wanting to expand. Well, this guy was waiting for this one to expand, because the moment the person does that, that person has one less wall to build. So all the incentives are on the second mover. Of course, when the guy expanded to the side, the partition wall has no quality. No fire resistance, no seismic resistance, no acoustic insulation. So there's when the conflict among neighbors begin to happen. So what we did was to put exactly the same house with the same strategy, back to back, with the void in between. So each family would expand to the void, for which the structure was already provided with a fire-resistant, seismic-resistant wall by your neighbor. And next one. So you see, somewhere there is the original house, two-story house of that social housing program. And then expansions happen even if you don't want to. It's a fact. It will happen. So the only thing what we're doing, understanding, is that the role of design is not to resist or repress or replace that force, but to channel that force. That's why the capacity of building, of families building themselves, not necessarily with their own hands. They hire people to build their new rooms. That's why we say people is part of the solution, not of the problem. With public funding, you can't build 80 square meters. You can build only 40. The next 40 are going to be built by the families no matter what. So let's better split task and agree on day one. Next one, some examples of what happens in those neighborhoods that we've been delivering for decades now. Next one. So by replacing them and just putting back to back, families expand in that void that was prepared and considering that as a fact. Next one. So as you see, we are also providing the wood beams that is structurally more difficult to be done than the roof and the partition wall. This is something that is hard to be achieved individually. But to add closings and rooms, it's relatively easy. But in addition, is the part where families begin to prefer, for depending on their needs, a lot of children, a lot of rooms. A business at home, then they have a small shop or something. Park the car inside. A lot of animals. It depends. You never know. And because the system, lack of resources, it contained in the DNA this capacity to accommodate diversity. Next one. So that's day one. Next one. Next one. Next one. This next one. The size of the void is very relevant. 3 meters, not 3.2. Steel is sold in Chile in 6 meters. You cut it in half. In 3.2, you have one part that is good, but then what do you do with the 2.8? You have to weld, and weld is complicated. If you have 6 cut in 2, no waste. Also, wood is sold in 3 meters. So the shelter measure of the panel is 3 meters. So even on day 1, you put that panel, and you have a room that was not there before. Next one. In addition, and we were talking, I think, the other day about this, when you have this courtyard, things like this begin to happen. For example, you would never be able to pay in the summer for a pool in your own plot. There's not even space, and you put it on the street, the next day it doesn't exist. But if you're in a courtyard, each family, for a small amount of money, can pay for goods, or let's say services that individually cannot be achieved, and knowing each other, these are the kind of things that an agreement can provide. So that's why scale matters. Next one. And even gardens have begun to take over. Next one. And yeah, I'm closing to the end. I'm close to the end. Don't worry. So one of the things of Constitución, it was originally source of income is forestry, but also tourism. They had these very incredible rocks, and there was a promenade around. So next one. Part of the projects were to recover that promenade around the city. Next one. With this kind of belvederes along the coast. Next one. Next one. But also the public buildings, and actually the one that took the most, it was opened maybe 6 months ago. So it took us 14 years to build the theater. It was the first voted, and people, strangely enough, wanted the theater first. And it may have had this emotional connection that the graduation after schools happened in the theater. It's not that it had a very strong cultural activity, but it was the central part of the community. We just wanted to shift to have public architecture in wood. It was never done before. So of course you need to break the wood labeled as, for the poor, so that municipal theater was, again, next one. As was in the main square, that was the day of the opening. Next one. Yeah, so the people flooded. There was a festival outside. The president came. So it finally, 14 years later, it began to complete the social fabric of the city. Next one. Next one. And finally, I would just like to show, this is a 3-minute video that we finished a couple of weeks ago of the reconstruction after the fires in the coastal city of Viña del Mar. A major disaster, an intentional fire, killed 140 people, 15,000 units. So again, the question, and we were working on the one with it has English subtitles, but not the text in English. But the point is that we normally face in tragedies, in disaster, this dilemma of, do you rebuild fast or do you rebuild good? And I think this was the first time that we encountered the need to rebuild fast and good. There was no option. Sometimes you don't even have the option, and you will see, hopefully, and if not, we can comment. We can run this video. Yes.
El 2 de febrero de 2024 se dieron las condiciones ideales para iniciar un incendio. Cerca del mediodía, 4 focos fueron activados intencionalmente. 5 horas después, el fuego alcanzaba la ciudad.
No podemos hacer nada.
sufrió el incendio más grande y letal de su historia. Una vez más, el país se iba a enfrentar a la dificultad de reconstruir rápido y bien. Rápido no solo por el drama de los damnificados, sino para enfrentar la presión de los narcos financiando tempranamente la ayuda. Y bien porque un gran número de familias rechazaron las soluciones de emergencia. En el Olivar, la mayoría de las viviendas dañadas se construyeron bajo una norma de los 80s, en que 4 familias compartían un lote de 13 por 18 metros. 35 años después, la norma actual impide reconstruir lo que había con fondos públicos. Para resolver estos nudos, al cabo del primer mes, presentamos al municipio un edificio con estándar de clase media, que tratamos como si fuera una casa grande para 4 familias. En abril, validamos la propuesta con las familias. Junto a la municipalidad, identificamos la manera de financiar tempranamente un piloto que nos permitiera pasar la posta a los organismos públicos responsables de escalarlo. Para acelerar la construcción, se usó un sistema prefabricado de acero y hormigón de última generación, capaz de ser montado en 24 horas. Finalmente, el 20 de enero, la Casa Grande inició su traslado hacia el Olivar. Representó una eternidad para las familias, pero fue un tiempo récord para construir viviendas definitivas. Esta experiencia prueba que cuando el Estado quiere, puede reconstruir rápido y bien.
So as you, I don't know if you got it, but because fast and good, fast, because for the first time we had narcos arriving early on, financing reconstruction. Across the ravine we saw the reconstruction of an entire hill. Maybe a month later, it was barely impossible to tell there had been a fire. Of course that was slums, and it's not that different, but narcos, the state has always run alone, never before had to compete with anybody, and narcos was a huge threat. And of course the exchange for that aid is that you lose territory and then you replace the rule of law by the law of the jungle. So that was one thing. Never before families had rejected emergency shelters. That was also new. Therefore, how to, and this is one of the projects, the first one that was put in place. We're still working in 2 other typologies with different, some of them with the same prefab system. But the main point here was, again, how to navigate the state funding system. In those plots that were shared by 4 families, it was enough that one of those families was not eligible for a subsidy. For example, if they had received a subsidy before in their life, and it would block the financing for the four families. So that's why, to run the pilot, we didn't go through the Ministry of Housing. We had to go to the Reconstruction Fund of the Ministry of Finance, then through the Ministry of the Interior that may have some mechanisms to, let's say, a state of exception, so that when you prove that this can be done, then like in a relay race, then the Ministry of Housing may take over, because this other, finance or interior, can move fast but cannot have scale. And only the Ministry of Housing has scale but cannot move fast. So these are, I would say, one of the lessons that we've learned, and we hope by the next time we have 2 more videos to show. Thank you so much.
We would like to thank you, Mr. Aravena, for your very insightful presentation and also for being here with us today. And now we will have a question-answer session. So please do not hesitate if you have any questions, so that I could bring you the microphone.
Should I stay there? Should I stay there?
I would like to, yeah.
Okay.
Hello, so thank you for the presentation and for being here. Is this on? I'm not sure. For the translation.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I'm not an architect, but I'm part of a civil society. We built a few container towns in Hatay, so I will be presenting tomorrow. But our biggest problem was where to find the material. Because I was really wondering when you were talking about this project, where was the material kept so that you could transform to the area when the time was needed, when it was needed? Because with us, the roads were all destroyed, right? And we didn't even know where we had material to bring to the area to build. And even with the containers, you were saying good or, rapid. Ours was terrible, but rapid. But even the containers, we had to call our friends in the shipping industry to have them build more containers. We even ran out of containers over the first month. So where to keep the materials, how to have them at hand, but not to also consume a lot of space to be ready for the disasters. So thank you so much.
Okay, so regarding the earthquake and tsunami in Constitución, that's why we moved, and the choice of material was what's the most available in the region. Being a forest region, wood was accumulated anyhow in all the industries that were then chipping them and then making cellulose. So we stopped the process a couple of steps earlier so that you can use wood as wood. Had been in a different region, but this is not necessarily because of the urgency. Of course, you have the logistics issue with the roads, but in social housing, that you have that problem too. Whenever you have a material that is too far away from where you're building, the cost of transportation makes it unavailable. So in the north of Chile, the first project we did was cement blocks. That was what available there. There were no bricks, no wood, just cement blocks. So it changes from region to region. In the case of Valparaiso, roads were not affected. Therefore, construction off-site was the solution. I mean, people didn't want to demolish because they were afraid of narcos taking an empty site. So they wanted to leave even the burnt unit there as a sign that this space has an owner. So therefore, construction off-site in a plant that was 100 kilometers away in Santiago. We're 100 kilometers from that city. But I would say that in any case, when you have this scale of reconstruction, you cannot trust on one solution. Your toolbox has to be large enough that you can have as many people entering the system. To start with, people themselves. So they may recycle things that were saved from the destruction. But we've been working, for example, with the IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, to certify certain prefabricators so that with 7 different technologies that range from wood to steel to concrete to printing, 3D printing, they are certified in advance with the Ministry of Housing. That is good for social housing. We do have a housing crisis, but in case a disaster happens, we may have 7 actors that were not there before. So I guess that, I mean, in more general terms, logistics will always be an issue, and it will depend on where it hits. But roads were recovered pretty soon. I would say a month later, because people needed food. Before housing, food was necessary. That's why the sackings and looting. So the urgency for reestablishing the physical connection, that was put in place pretty soon. And the military know how to do that, or the Ministry of Public Works, because they're big operations. They have one thing to do at a time. Housing is more complicated because it's had more layers. So we, even though at the beginning it was not possible to arrive, I would say maybe a week or 10 days later, connections were reestablished. Our problem was not logistics. was more this administrative funding issue. But in any case, the more tools you have in your toolbox, I guess the better you're prepared in case a part of the spectrum of the solutions hits some problem. I think it's not, the microphone is not working, no?
Okay. Again, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. An excellent example of integrating, collaborating among various professionals' expertise and disciplines. So it's like an education for us, not only in terms of the cases you're showing, but also as a mindset. The thing I'm sort of curious about is that there are various very conflicting powers in issues like that. And yours is a very, beyond being architecture, beyond being design, it's a design of strategies among agencies which have very different power positions. I'm curious about this whole, process of, working with them, how to negotiate, and how to proceed. Your timeline at the beginning, 1 day, 3 days, 100 days, showed us how you proceeded, but how do you balance? How did you negotiate? How people did negotiate? How was the arbitration went on? Because that's the crucial thing. And again, thank you for your humble approach to your profession, which you are excellent of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you. How to negotiate? I would say by being ignorant. Because I genuinely don't know about these issues. I mean, that's why I mentioned this mastermind behind. There are brains that are capable of seeing things where I don't see anything. They look at wavelengths in the air and they connect things. I said, look at that. I mean, how they connect. And say, I see nothing there. So this is Andres Jacobelli. And he is the type of person that is able to read in between the lines in terms of how to navigate complex systems. Then I mentioned Tironi, which is a strategic communication company. They also know how to read people. We had done participatory processes at the, let's say, housing level, 100 families, 300 families, never 50,000 people. That is the entire city level. So how to design the forums, hybrid forums for specific tasks, the river shore or the fishermen, or the whole city level. So they also have, there's a knowledge there that I do not have. We've learned over time about these issues. But when I said ignorance, let me tell you one story regarding that. So we are hired, and the fact that you were hired by a private company, even though we designed that client to which we were reporting to, it's in any case suspicious. Or at least in Chile, everybody or everything that has some level of power is suspicious. We're a society that doesn't trust the other by nature. So even more so under these circumstances. So of course, we were hired, and then we built the open house in the main square. And at some point, the Tironi people began to gather this kind of rumor that community will not move ahead with the sustainable reconstruction plan unless the discussion whether the cellulose plant stays in the city or not was debated. And the complaints were about the smell of the cellulose in the city. And they were asking that to move ahead, the plant should be moved, so 10 kilometers, 15 kilometers. So we and Tironi went to the cellulose to the forest company and said, look, the families is raising this issue that we should discuss whether to move the plant or not. And they said, are you crazy? I mean, can we even open that to discussion? This is, I know, a $4 billion investment. It's out of the question that we move the plant. Well, going back to the community, well, if the company is not willing to discuss this issue, then this project stops here. And then in Chile, when people say stops here, it means barricades, it means blocking roads. I mean, it's pretty clear that you're not going to be able to move ahead. But back and forth, finally we said, I mean, it's impossible to move ahead unless we have this discussion. And there was one debate in the square where the company finally opened up to discuss the possibility to move the plant. And in the discussion, they said, or I mean, it was said, I don't think it was them, but somebody briefed them that the paradigm of the forest companies in the 60s, when it was built by the state, that then was, acquired by this private company, the paradigm was plants close to the ports. 50 years later, the paradigm is plants close to the plantations. So, if they were going to move the plant and study it, they would move it 150 kilometers where the plantations are. And when that thing appeared, the crowd, no, wait. Because they knew if that happens, all the jobs are lost. So the discussion then moved to, okay, so why do you want us to move the plant? To move the plant is the answer, but it's not the question. What is the question? What is the problem that you have? And the problem was the smell. So the way people were thinking to solve the problem of the smell was by moving the plant. But it was not the only way out. And the discussion then moved into the filters. So there was an investment plan of the company for the next 5 years, and they moved that investment to right now. So those couple of $1 million that in filters were implemented right away, and that allowed the project to move ahead. So again, the focus is, what is the question? Because if you're debating on that was the wrong, the answer of the moving of the plant was to the wrong question. But you only go into this kind of discussions by not knowing. I mean, I have no idea. Should they move it? Both of them are right. So I guess at the moment you're at least able to identify, but what is the mean, what is the tool you're using, and what is the subject that you're trying to address? And that helps to clarify these different agendas. Normally people tend to offer as the matter of discussion a tool and not the problem. And there are many tools for a given problem. And I guess that has been systematically the way around agendas that are far bigger than us. But then you have to be rigorous with your ignorance and make stupid questions. And that may allow, it's not guaranteed, may allow you to move ahead.
We would like to ask you a question, and it's going to be in Turkish.
Okay.
It's for translation.
Hello, I'm a journalist. What do you think about the buildings in Istanbul and earthquake?
Can you stand up? Okay.
Hello. What do you think about the buildings in Istanbul and earthquake is expected here too? Thank you.
So what do you think about the buildings in Istanbul in terms of?
Earthquake. Yes.
Well, I don't know it enough. When looking at the old structures, which is what I've been sketching and measuring since 1991, when you sketch, you somehow build again. So you can see how a weight, a certain meters above ground. Oh, sorry, I'll start again. You wait for the translation. Okay. Yeah? Okay. So again, what I was saying is that when you sketch, you somehow build again. So when sketching, you are trying to understand how a weight is brought from a certain height to the foundation, to the ground. And because of the form of the buildings, it's pretty clear that you've been very successful in dealing with gravity. So you can see forces going down, and eventually, when you have a dome pushing outwards, I'm talking about old buildings mainly here to start with. But in Chile, we've been trained to look at the buildings not vertically in terms of gravity, but horizontally because of the earthquake. So somehow, what we tend to do in Chile is to turn buildings 90 degrees to see how that building works as if an earthquake was gravity. And normally, they tend to collapse. That's why old structures that are not seismically resistant or designed for that have trouble in horizontal movements. There are some strategies that we've witnessed in old buildings where the foundation, instead of being very strong, is the opposite. They tend to be liquid. So you have pebbles and rubble and then sand, and when an earthquake enters the system, the foundation becomes, it's a kind of seismic isolator. But not always, it was not always done like that. So not knowing enough, what one tends to see is that looking at the acceleration horizontally, what has resisted fantastically well against gravity won't make it in an earthquake. But that regarding heavy buildings, stone buildings. If you have wood buildings on the other end of the spectrum, they tend to be very flexible. So they liberate energy through movement without collapsing. So it's very likely that they may be fragile against fire, but I guess that the buildings that have resisted the most over time are wood structures because they never take the acceleration of the ground or liberate it through flexibility. In between the two, the old structures, pure gravity, and the wood structure that are very malleable, are concrete buildings. Let's say the last 100 years. And it depends. And this may be, sorry that it may become a little bit technical, but that's what I've learned while asking and being rigorous with my ignorance. What we've learned is that before choosing a structural system, or let's say if the aim is that a structure can break but not collapse so that lives are saved, to make sure that that will happen, you have to make sure that the period of vibration of the ground is not the same period of vibration of your structure. For that, you have to know your soil. Depending on where you are, the vibration, if this is pure rock, or let's say gravel, it may be around 1.5 seconds. If this is sand, it may be around 3 seconds. Just make sure that the structure on top doesn't match that period. Because if it's the same period of vibration, then it enters in resonance and the movement is amplified and then buildings collapse. Wall structures tend to not collapse, unlike frame structure, as I said before. So to know your soil may have been the biggest improvement in structural engineering in Chile after 1985. Before that, you put a structure that was well calculated, but never was the consciousness that the ground before had to be studied before choosing your structural system. And this is something that we learned from the Mexico earthquake that was also in 1985, because in Mexico it was very strange. You may remember that in the city, one block entirely collapsed and the next block didn't. Entire blocks. And this is because Mexico was on a lake with some islands. So the moment, and then of course the water was taken out, but the period of vibration remained connected to the original soil. Those buildings that were on the, let's say, more harder part, normally in Mexico they would build with frame structures. They didn't match the period of vibration of the ground, but the ones that were more on the sandy area had the same period of vibration. So they entered in resonance and collapsed. So this is a big learning from Mexico that we integrated into the code. Finally, I know, I can't see, we met the other day, I think there was this from your tuba team, this chemical engineer. I heard from a chemical engineer from Germany, Michael Braungart, that he had studied, not this earthquake, but before, the performance of the rebars in Turkey. And the problem with the steel here is that, I don't know what's the percentage of them that comes from recycling it from the car industry. Cars that cannot be recycled in the US or in Europe because they have laws that make it too expensive are accepted here. And when you take it here and you recycle that steel for making rebars, those rebars have too much copper inside. And that means that those rebars have osteoporosis. So when you have, you need the rebars to hold a frame structure, but if those bones have osteoporosis, then no wonder the joints collapse. So I guess that this is an issue that if I had to focus, because in the end the old buildings somehow, they tend not to have people living in them. Wood structure will take care of itself. What's in the center? The concrete structure is there where some survey needs to be done to anticipate either osteoporosis or the period of vibration on the ground not matching the ones on top. And then maybe after that survey, you may know which building have a higher chance to collapse, and that would be, a way to start with preventing the problem and not just lamenting it.
So Alejandro, thank you so much, in fact, but I also have a kind of a question. I hope it is, perhaps it could be the last question for this session, that we may go for a break too. With your very inspiring talk, we start to, in fact, we were also thinking that with these disasters and everything, that huge demolition of the bigger areas and zones and everything, it makes us question our relation to our profession, as to the definitions and roles of architects and designing and really creating certain further cultures of socially engaged architectures too. So what I have in my mind is, with all these disasters, that is, shaking the ground, taking down what has been built before. This is one thing, and making us rethink what to do next time with different, perhaps, ways of grasping our profession too, developing our organizing capabilities, talking with people, understanding geographies, understanding perhaps local materials more and further, and so as to develop some sustainable structures over there too. But at the same time, it also, I think, changes our grasp of the, design, architecture, building, construction, and just socially engaged building, really, because it's not like an industry, like architects and constructing people are doing it. It is something that is evolving into a different kind of a culture where we need to build together somehow. And we should be developing perhaps an educational system, a different and further understanding of what architecture is, and perhaps different patterns of living together too. It seems to me like that. It's not a kind of perhaps what you did is something really great, but as architects, what we think is with our gestures of design, what to do quickly and, to make people live together still with the patterns we know, perhaps. So, first, the first question is, do you have any further ideas on what those disasters make us question our relation with profession, with public, with construction industries? And the second is, since your elemental projects and housing projects are so much, open sourced projects too, which is, I think, very, very valuable at the same time. Does that create a different collective intelligence that turns back to you as something further adding to what you are doing, and that may contribute back to the, still making together thing? So these are the two perhaps questions I have in mind that is revolving round and round.
Yes.
And thank you for everything. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes, I think it's absolutely right that the need, almost every single relevant, important, purposeful question is not architectural. Strictly speaking, is somewhere else. So it could be society, it could be political, it could be environmental, it could be emotional. So anger, resentment, violence, security, so you name it. The things that all of us are interested in and look into the newspapers are, strictly speaking, not architectural. So that is, being that true, we as architects are required to speak those languages. That of economics, I'm not an economist, but I had to learn quickly and overcome as much as possible your ignorance. What I've just said about technical issues is not that I knew it, but you listen to people that know about it, and then you, as fast as possible, you put it into your system because you have to have it inside. And that tends to happen almost with every single project that you're dealing with. There's somebody that knows their subject much better than you do. The point is that in order to operate, you don't have to become that other. You have to enter a non-architectural conversation by contributing with what you know to do best, which is to design. Others can't. When you're in a meeting like this and you have a board here, there's a lot of, knowledge, policy and administration, budget, community manifesting what they prefer. But in the end, somebody has to pick up the pen and draw something. This is something that we can do as architects. So the point is that in order to engage in non-architectural conversations, we have to speak that language, but then enter with doing what we know best, which is to design. And in other words, that architecture, in the end, is about giving form to the places where people live. It's not more complicated than that, but also not easier than that. Giving form to the places where people live. As soon as you double-click on the terms of that sentence that is apparently inoffensive, giving form, what informs that form? What are the forces at play? And then one of them is your gesture, the ones that we were taught at schools. All that language of architects that nobody else understands. Well, that is one of the forces at play. How do you go to an architectural congress and are able to survive that congress by speaking as complicated as possible with this jargon? So that's one force, but it's a minor force compared to economics, politics, policy, the environment, the preference of people, the emotions of people. So again, those forces will inform your form. It's impossible to know what is the form before you've understood the forces. Therefore, a notion of style or something is out of the question. But then the other thing that matters here is the nature of places is so diverse that then you have to be an expert in housing, houses, offices. So the spectrum is rather big. And finally, where people live. What is life made of? It's based, breathing and, eating and drinking, but then also all the intangible dimensions of the human condition. As a consequence, it's a complex question. And the more complex the question, the more need for synthesis. And if there's anything at the core of our practice as architects, is synthetic. It's not all the information, but the key one. We were talking the other day about this at Aura. So one thing is synthesis. The other is that you organize all what you've heard in a proposal key. It's not just to repeat as, let's say, knowledge. I don't need to know about the subjects. I want to use that knowledge in order to jump into the blank page, because that jump into the void is very risky. And I would be prepared to be accompanied by as much knowledge as possible, but nothing prevents that adrenaline of the uncertainty of the jump into the void of the blank page. What we can do in any case naturally is to organize the information in a proposal key, the what if. What if we do this? What if we do that? And this, I guess, is also something that we are naturally trained for. Because if you fail, you iterate, and you do it again and again. But so again, I would say that the role of profession in those terms, it changes from just channeling a big force, and then you provide the frame, to have absolute control on what you're doing, the structure. I don't want a single millimeter to be there without having been tested by engineers or ourselves. So it's a dance between certainty and uncertainty, of having power and letting go. I was not educated like that. This is something that I guess that we've been forced, and I guess all of us in today's world are more and more facing this type of questions. It's a question of being flexible enough to understand when you know very little about the subject.